The crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across the marble floors of the Whitmore mansion as Charlotte adjusted her emerald necklace for the third time that evening. At 25, she had attended countless charity galas, but tonight felt different somehow, heavier with expectation and suffocating in its opulence. The annual Children's Foundation fundraiser was her father's pet project, a way to cleanse the Whitmore family name while expanding their political connections across New York's elite circles. Charlotte, "Darling, Senator Morrison's son is here," her mother. Vivian Whitmore glided across the room in her designer gown, her smile as practiced as her perfectly sculpted face. "He's quite taken with you, and his father has been most generous to our causes." Charlotte suppressed a sigh, knowing that her mother's definition of generous had little to do with charity and everything to do with business partnerships. The Whitmore pharmaceutical empire had made them one of the wealthiest families on the East Coast. But with wealth came expectations, and Charlotte was expected to marry within their social stratum, produce heirs, and maintain the family legacy. As guests filled the ballroom, Charlotte found herself gravitating toward the serving area, ostensibly to check on the catering arrangements, but really to escape the parade of potential suitors her parents kept introducing. That's when she first noticed her, a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, moving gracefully between tables with a tray of champagne glasses. There was something captivating about the way she carried herself, professional yet somehow untouchable, as if she existed in a different world despite being surrounded by Charlotte's usual circle. When their eyes met across the crowded room, Charlotte felt an unexpected flutter in her chest, a sensation she'd never experienced with any of the Harvard and Yale graduates her parents deemed suitable. "Excuse me." Charlotte approached the serving station, pretending to inspect the hors d'oeuvres arrangement. "I don't think we've met. I'm Charlotte." The young woman looked up, revealing striking green eyes that seemed both wise and guarded. "Maya," she replied softly, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested she wasn't accustomed to speaking much during these events. "Maya Chen. I'm with Platinum Catering." "You don't look like you belong here," Charlotte said, then immediately regretted her words. "I mean, you seem different from the usual staff. More genuine." Maya's laugh was quiet but genuine. "Neither do you, if I'm being honest. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." The observation was so accurate it startled Charlotte. Here was someone who could see through the carefully constructed facade she'd worn her entire life. Is it that obvious? To someone who knows what it's like to feel out of place, yes. Maya glanced around the opulent ballroom, though I imagine for different reasons. Their conversation was interrupted by Charlotte's father, Richard Whitmore, approaching with his characteristic commanding presence. Even at 62, he remained an imposing figure whose pharmaceutical company had revolutionized pain management medications, making him both incredibly wealthy and somewhat controversial due to the ongoing opioid crisis. "Charlotte, there you are. The Ashfords are asking about you." His sharp blue eyes briefly assessed Maya before dismissing her entirely. "Come, we have important people to see." As Charlotte was pulled away, she turned back to catch Maya's eye, mouthing, "I'm sorry," before disappearing into the crowd. But the brief encounter had left an indelible impression, and throughout the evening, Charlotte found herself stealing glances at the auburn-haired waitress, who seemed to navigate the world of wealth and privilege like an invisible observer. Later, as the evening wound down, Charlotte managed to slip away from the lingering guests and found Maya cleaning glasses in the kitchen. The contrast between the sterile service area and the opulent ballroom felt symbolic somehow. Two different worlds existing within the same space. "I wanted to apologize for my father earlier," Charlotte said, leaning against the doorframe. "He can be brusque with staff." Maya looked up from her work, studying Charlotte's face. "You don't need to apologize for him, though I appreciate that you thought to. Can I ask you something? Have we met before? There's something familiar about you." A shadow crossed Maya's features. So quickly, Charlotte almost missed it. "I don't think so. I'd remember meeting a Whitmore." The way she said the family name carried an edge that Charlotte couldn't quite interpret. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Away from all this?" The invitation surprised even Charlotte. She'd never asked anyone out so directly. certainly not someone from outside her social circle. Maya hesitated, her hand stilling on the glasses she'd been polishing. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Miss Whitmore. We're from very different worlds. That's exactly why I'm asking." Charlotte stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm tired of my world. It feels like I'm suffocating in silk and expectations." Something in Charlotte's earnest expression seemed to reach Maya. After a long moment, she pulled a business card from her apron pocket, not her own, but one from the coffee shop where she worked during the day. "I'm usually there Tuesday afternoons," she said quietly, "if you really want to talk to someone from a different world." As Charlotte took the card, their fingers briefly touched, and she felt that same electric flutter from earlier. "Maya Chen," she read aloud. "Is that Chinese?" "Adopted name," Maya replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't remember my original one." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Charlotte wanted to ask more, but Maya had already turned back to her work, effectively ending the conversation. Driving home through the quiet Manhattan streets in her Tesla, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Maya had shifted something fundamental in her carefully ordered life. The coffee shop card sat on her passenger seat like a small rebellion against everything she'd been raised to value. Status, connections, appropriate relationships. She thought about Maya's guarded expression, the way she'd said she didn't remember her original name, and the strange familiarity that had nagged at Charlotte all evening. There was more to Maya Chen than met the eye, and despite every rational thought telling her to stick to her predetermined path, Charlotte knew she would be at that coffee shop on Tuesday. What she didn't know was that this decision would unravel secrets that had been buried for 20 years, secrets that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family, her world, and herself. The small cafe in Brooklyn felt like entering another universe compared to Charlotte's usual Manhattan haunts. Mismatched furniture, local art on exposed brick walls, and the genuine aroma of freshly ground coffee beans created an atmosphere that was both humble and inviting. Charlotte had never ventured this far from her Upper East Side bubble, and she felt conspicuous in her designer clothes, despite having chosen the most casual items from her wardrobe. Maya was already there when Charlotte arrived, tucked into a corner table with a worn paperback novel and a steaming mug. She'd traded her catering uniform for jeans and a simple sweater, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. Without the formal barrier of work attire, she looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Maya said. Closing her book, Charlotte glimpsed the title, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. "I wasn't sure either," Charlotte admitted, sliding into the opposite chair. "But I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation." Over the next hour, they talked with an ease that surprised them both. Maya shared that she was 23, worked 2 jobs to pay for community college classes, and lived in a small studio apartment she could barely afford. Charlotte found herself opening up about the suffocating expectations of her family, her MBA from Wharton that she'd never wanted, and her fear that she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. "What do you really want to do?" Maya asked, stirring honey into her second cup of coffee. Charlotte paused, realizing no one had ever asked her that question seriously. "I think I'd like to be a teacher. Elementary school, maybe. I used to volunteer at a children's center before my father decided it wasn't an appropriate use of my time." "Why wasn't it appropriate?" "Because Whitmores don't work with their hands, we work with our minds and our money," Charlotte recited bitterly. "We fund the centers, we don't work in them." Maya's expression shifted, something unreadable passing across her features. "Your family funds children's centers?" "Among other things. The Children's Foundation, various foster care organizations, missing children advocacy groups." Charlotte noticed Maya's hands tighten around her mug. "It's good work, I suppose, though sometimes I wonder if it's more about tax write-offs than genuine caring." "Missing children advocacy?" Maya's voice was carefully controlled. "Yes, it's been one of my father's main causes for about 20 years. He's quite passionate about it." Charlotte studied Maya's face, noting the tension that had suddenly appeared. "Are you okay?" Maya stood abruptly. "I should go. I have a shift in an hour." "Did I say something wrong?" Charlotte reached out, gently touching Maya's arm. The contact sent a familiar jolt through both of them. "No, it's complicated." Maya sat back down, her internal struggle visible. Charlotte, what do you know about why your father started supporting those organizations? The question was oddly specific, and Charlotte felt a chill despite the warmth of the cafe. Not much, actually. He doesn't talk about his motivations often. Why? Maya seemed to be wrestling with a decision. Finally, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos before handing it to Charlotte. I need to show you something, but I want you to promise you'll let me explain before you react. The photo on the screen was a missing child poster, weathered and faded. The image showed a young girl with auburn hair and green eyes, maybe 4 or 5 years old. The text read, Sofia Martinez, missing since October 15th, 2004. Last seen at Central Park Playground. If you have any information, please contact NYPD. Charlotte stared at the image, her breath catching. The resemblance to Maya was unmistakable. But more than that, something about the child's face triggered a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Maya, she whispered. My name wasn't always Maya Chen, Maya said quietly. I woke up in a hospital in Philadelphia 3 weeks after this poster was made. No memory of how I got there, no memory of my life before. The doctor said I had suffered severe trauma, that amnesia wasn't uncommon in such cases. Charlotte's hands began to shake as she held the phone. I'm Sofia Martinez, or I was. The family that found me, the Chens, they were kind people who couldn't have children. When no one came forward to claim me after months of searching, they were allowed to adopt me. They gave me a new name, a new life. The coffee shop seemed to spin around Charlotte. But why are you showing me this? How does this connect to... The realization hit her like a physical blow. You think my family is connected to your disappearance? Maya's silence was answer enough. That's impossible, Charlotte said. But even as she spoke, fragments of memory began surfacing. Being 5 years old and overhearing hushed conversations between her parents. Her father's sudden interest in missing children causes. The way certain topics were never discussed in their household. Charlotte, I've spent years trying to piece together what happened to me. I've visited dozens of private investigators, searched through old records, followed every lead. Maya leaned forward, her voice urgent but gentle. 6 months ago, I finally got access to the original police files. Your father's name appears several times in the investigation notes. As what? A suspect? Charlotte's voice was barely audible. As someone who was very interested in the case. Unusually interested, according to Detective Rodriguez, who's retired now, but agreed to speak with me. Maya pulled out a small notebook, her hands trembling slightly. He said your father called weekly for updates, offered to fund additional search efforts, and seemed to know details about my disappearance that hadn't been made public. Charlotte felt the world tilting around her. Everything she thought she knew about her family, about the foundation of her entire life, was suddenly in question. What kind of details? The kind that someone who was there might know. Maya's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back. Charlotte, I didn't seek you out at that gala by accident. I've been working catering events in your social circle for months, trying to get close to your family, trying to find answers. The betrayal hit Charlotte harder than the revelation itself. So everything between us. This was all planned? No! Maya reached across the table, grasping Charlotte's hands. I mean, yes, I engineered meeting you, but what happened between us? What I'm feeling, that's real. I didn't expect to care about you. Charlotte pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. I need air. I need to think. Outside the cafe, the Brooklyn street felt foreign and hostile. Everything familiar had been stripped away in the span of an hour. The woman she was falling in love with was potentially the victim of something her family was involved in. The father she'd always seen as distant but fundamentally decent might be harboring dark secrets. Maya followed her outside, maintaining a respectful distance. I know this is a lot. I've been living with these questions for months. What do you want from me? Charlotte asked, turning to face her. What do you expect me to do with this information? I want the truth, Maya said simply. And I think, despite everything, you want it too. Charlotte looked at Maya, Sofia, this woman who had turned her world upside down with a few photographs and revelations. The rational part of her mind screamed that she should walk away, protect her family, maintain the status quo. But the larger part, the part that had been suffocating in silk and expectations, knew that Maya was right. If I help you find answers, Charlotte said slowly, it could destroy everything I've ever known. I know, Maya replied softly. But isn't living a lie worse than facing the truth? As Charlotte stood on that Brooklyn sidewalk, she realized she was at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. Behind her lay everything familiar but false. Ahead lay uncertainty, potential heartbreak, and the possibility of truth. She thought about the missing child in the photograph, about the years of searching and unanswered questions, about the woman standing before her who had been brave enough to seek justice despite the personal cost. What do you need me to do? Charlotte asked. Charlotte hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the missing child poster, Maya's face superimposed over little Sofia Martinez, and her father's cold blue eyes that suddenly seemed to hold secrets she'd never noticed before. The Whitmore mansion, once her sanctuary of privilege, now felt like a museum of lies where every family portrait and childhood memory was tainted by suspicion. She'd agreed to meet Maya again, this time at Maya's tiny studio apartment in Queens. The contrast between their living situations was stark. While Charlotte's bedroom suite was larger than Maya's entire apartment, there was something honest about the space that made Charlotte feel more comfortable than she had in her own home. I've been digging deeper into the records, Maya said, spreading documents across her small kitchen table. Look at this. The papers were photocopies of police reports, hospital records, and newspaper clippings. Charlotte felt sick looking at them, seeing Maya's, Sophia's, story reduced to bureaucratic documentation. This is the hospital record from when I was found, Maya pointed to a form. Philadelphia General, October 30th, 2004. But here's what's interesting. The bill was paid by an anonymous benefactor. Cash payment, no insurance, no questions asked. Charlotte studied the document, her business training allowing her to spot the irregularities. This is expensive. Weeks of care, psychological evaluation, medical tests. We're talking $50,000, maybe more. Exactly. What kind of person finds a traumatized child and pays for her care anonymously? Maya pulled out another document. And look at this, the adoption records. The Chens were fast-tracked through the system in a way that typically takes years. Someone with connections made it happen quickly, Charlotte murmured. Understanding the implications, someone with money and influence. Maya's voice was steady, but Charlotte could see the pain behind her controlled expression. Someone who wanted a missing child to disappear permanently into a new identity. Charlotte picked up one of the newspaper clippings, dated November 2004. The headline read, "Search for Missing Girl Continues. Family Desperate for Answers." Below was a photo of a young Hispanic woman and an older man, both holding pictures of little Sofia. My birth parents, Maya said quietly, noticing Charlotte's focus. Rosa and Miguel Martinez. They never stopped looking for me. Never stopped? Rosa died of a heart attack in 2019, the stress, according to Miguel. She spent 15 years searching for a daughter who was hidden in plain sight 3 hours away. Maya's voice broke slightly. Miguel is still alive. He's 68 now, works as a janitor at a school in the Bronx, still puts up missing posters every year on the anniversary. Charlotte felt the weight of this revelation crushing her chest. Maya, I know. And there's more. Maya pulled out a folder she'd been reluctant to open. I hired a private investigator last month. Former NYPD detective, specializes in cold cases. She found something that connects directly to your family. The folder contained surveillance photos, financial records, and what appeared to be correspondence. Charlotte's hands shook as she recognized her father's letterhead on several documents. These are donations to various organizations, Charlotte said, trying to maintain objectivity. It's not unusual for my father to support. Look at the dates, Maya interrupted gently. Every single one of these donations was made within 6 months of my disappearance. The Children's Foundation, the Foster Care Alliance, Missing Kids Network. He donated over $2 million in that period alone. Charlotte stared at the dates, a cold realization creeping up her spine. He was covering his tracks, making himself look like a champion of missing children to deflect suspicion. That's what I think. But there's something else. Maya hesitated, then pulled out a photograph that made Charlotte gasp. It was a surveillance photo of a parking garage, dated October 13th, 2004, 2 days before Sophia's disappearance. In the image, 2 figures were walking toward a black SUV. One was clearly Richard Whitmore, younger but unmistakable. The other was a woman Charlotte didn't recognize. Who is she? Dr. Sarah Kellerman. She was a psychiatrist who worked with the Children's Foundation. She specialized in memory disorders and trauma therapy. Maya's voice was carefully controlled. She disappeared from New York 3 weeks after I was found in Philadelphia. No forwarding address, no professional references, like she never existed. The pieces were forming a picture that Charlotte didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. You think she was involved in what happened to you? In making you forget? I think your father and Dr. Kellerman were part of a network. I think children were being taken, their memories erased, and then placed in new homes where they'd never be found. Maya's words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for too long. I think I wasn't the only one. Charlotte stood abruptly, pacing the small apartment. This is insane. My father, he wouldn't. But even as she spoke, she remembered the phone calls that stopped when she entered rooms, the business trips that were never fully explained, the way certain topics were absolutely forbidden in their household. Charlotte, I know this is hard, but I need you to think. Has your father ever said anything, done anything that seemed off? Any memories from your childhood that didn't make sense? Charlotte closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. Suddenly, a scene came flooding back. She was maybe 7 years old, walking into her father's study late one night. He was on the phone, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I remember. I walked in on him once. He was talking about packages and deliveries, and when he saw me, he got angry in a way I'd never seen before. The memory made her feel sick. He asked me what I'd heard, and when I said nothing, he told me that some conversations weren't for little girls, and that I should never repeat things I didn't understand. Maya nodded grimly. Anything else? The basement. There's a part of our basement that was always locked. When I was young, I asked about it once, and my mother said it was just storage. But the way she said it, Charlotte shuddered. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear sounds coming from down there. Like crying. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Maya reached out and took Charlotte's hand, offering comfort despite being the one who needed it most. We need to get into that basement, Maya said softly. Maya, if what you're suggesting is true, if my father was involved in your disappearance and others, we're not just talking about a crime. We're talking about a systematic operation that has been covered up for 20 years. I know, and I know what I'm asking of you. If we expose this, your family's reputation will be destroyed. Your father could go to prison. Your entire life will change forever. Charlotte looked at Maya, seeing not just the woman she was falling in love with, but the lost child in the poster, the parents who never stopped searching, the years of identity confusion and unanswered questions. My life is already changing forever, Charlotte said. The question is whether I'm brave enough to face the truth. That night, Charlotte returned to the Whitmore mansion with a plan. She would wait until her parents were at their weekly dinner with the governor, then search the locked basement room. Maya would wait in the car as backup, ready to call the police if Charlotte didn't emerge within 2 hours. As Charlotte lay in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still marked constellations she'd memorized as a child, she wondered if she would ever feel safe again. Tomorrow, she would either prove Maya wrong and salvage her relationship with her family, or uncover evidence that would destroy everything she'd ever believed about the people who raised her. Either way, there would be no going back to the golden cage that had once seemed like home. The Whitmore mansion felt different at night, when Charlotte knew she was the only one home. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets. Every creak of the old wood floors sounded like footsteps following her. She'd waited until her parents left for their dinner with Governor Richardson, a weekly tradition that would keep them away for at least 3 hours. Maya sat in her borrowed Honda Civic across the street, hidden behind a line of oak trees that bordered the estate. They'd synchronized their watches like characters in a thriller movie, though the gravity of their situation was all too real. If Charlotte didn't emerge by midnight, Maya would call the police and pray they'd believe a story that sounded too incredible to be true. The basement key had been easier to find than Charlotte expected. Her father's study, which she'd avoided for years, contained a locked desk drawer whose contents would have been obvious to anyone looking for evidence of wrongdoing. The key was labeled simply Archive, though Charlotte suspected the reality of what lay behind the locked door was far more sinister. The basement stairs creaked under her feet as she descended, each step taking her further from the world of privilege and denial she'd known her entire life. The main basement area was exactly what one would expect in a mansion. Wine cellars, storage rooms, mechanical equipment for the pool and climate control systems. But in the far corner, past the wine collection that represented more money than most people saw in a lifetime, was a steel door that belonged in a medical facility rather than a private home. Charlotte's hands shook as she inserted the key. For a moment, she considered turning back, returning to ignorance and the illusion of a normal family. But Maya's face flashed in her mind, not as the waitress she'd met at the gala, but as the terrified child in the missing poster, and she turned the key. The room beyond was sterile and cold, equipped with medical equipment that made Charlotte's stomach turn. There were restraints on what appeared to be an examination table, cabinets full of medication she didn't recognize, and filing cabinets that lined one entire wall. But most disturbing of all were the photographs. Dozens of children's faces stared back at her from a corkboard that covered most of the opposite wall. Missing children, their photos connected by red string to locations, dates, and what appeared to be code names. Charlotte recognized several faces from missing children posters she'd seen over the years, including a younger version of Maya's photo. Her hands trembling, Charlotte opened the first filing cabinet. The folders inside were meticulously organized, each containing detailed documentation that told a story more horrifying than she could have imagined. Project Renaissance, read the label on the first folder. Inside were psychological evaluations, medical procedures, and transformation protocols. The language was clinical, but the content was nightmarish. Detailed instructions for erasing a child's memory and creating a new identity. Maya's file was there, labeled Subject 23, Sofia Martinez, age 4, acquired 10/15/04. The documents detailed her abduction from Central Park, her transport to what was described as a processing facility, and the subsequent memory erasure procedures performed by Dr. Sarah Kellerman. Charlotte sank into a chair, reading through medical notes that described Maya as resistant to initial treatments and requiring additional sedation. The cold, scientific language couldn't mask the horror of what had been done to a 4-year-old child. But Maya wasn't alone. The files documented dozens of children over nearly 2 decades, each one stolen from their families and delivered to wealthy couples, who had paid enormous sums for what the documents euphemistically called placement services. The business model was horrifyingly efficient. Children were taken from families who couldn't fight back, immigrants, single mothers, families involved with social services. Their memories were erased, their appearances sometimes altered through minor surgical procedures, and they were given new identities before being placed with couples who had been vetted for their ability to pay and their willingness to ask no. Questions. Charlotte found records of payments. Hundreds of thousands of dollars per child, sometimes more if the buyers had specific requirements. The operation had generated millions in revenue over the years, with her father taking a significant percentage as what the documents called operational overhead and protection services. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Everything okay? It's been an hour." Charlotte realized she'd lost track of time while reading through the files. She quickly photographed as many documents as she could manage, her phone's camera capturing evidence that would destroy her father and potentially dozens of other people involved in the network. In the final filing cabinet, she found something that made her blood run cold. Recent files, dating from just 6 months ago. The operation was still active. Among the recent documents was a folder labeled Current Acquisitions, Phase 7. Inside were photos and basic information about children who had been identified as targets. Charlotte recognized the locations, all from areas where the Children's Foundation did outreach work. Her father's charity wasn't just a front for his past crimes. It was a hunting ground for future victims. As Charlotte photographed the last of the documents, She heard a sound that made her freeze, the electric garage door opening upstairs. Her parents were home early. She quickly closed the filing cabinets, turned off the lights, and locked the steel door behind her. But as she climbed the basement stairs, she could hear voices in the kitchen. Her parents talking to someone else. A man's voice she didn't recognize. "Told you she was getting suspicious," the unknown voice was saying. "Maya Chen has been asking too many questions, and now she's gotten close to your daughter." Charlotte froze on the stairs, understanding with horrible clarity that they were talking about Maya. "We can handle Charlotte," her father's voice replied coldly. "She's always been naive about the world. As for the Chen girl, she's become a liability." "Then we need to accelerate the timeline," the unknown voice continued. "Dr. Kellerman is already in position. One more procedure, and the Chen girl won't remember any of this." Problem solved. Charlotte's blood turned to ice. They were planning to abduct Maya again, to erase her memories again, to turn her back into a ghost who couldn't threaten their operation. She had to warn Maya, but first, she had to get out of the house without being detected. She could hear the conversation moving closer to the basement door, and she realized with growing panic that they might be coming downstairs, moving as quietly as possible. Charlotte made her way to the basement's exterior entrance, a set of old cellar doors that led directly to the backyard. The doors were heavy and rusted, but they opened with a creak that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. Once outside, Charlotte ran toward the street where Maya was waiting, her mind racing with everything she'd discovered and the immediate danger they were both in. The evidence on her phone could expose the entire network, bring justice for Maya and dozens of other victims. But first, they had to survive the night. As she reached Maya's car, Charlotte saw her father's silhouette appear in an upstairs window, looking out at the grounds. Had he seen her? Did he know what she'd discovered? "Drive," Charlotte gasped as she threw herself into the passenger seat. "Drive now. They know about you. They know everything." Maya didn't hesitate, pulling away from the curb with the urgency of someone who had been running her entire life. As they sped through the quiet streets of Charlotte's neighborhood, Charlotte told Maya everything she'd found in the basement. 20 years, Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. 20 years and dozens of children. How did no one stop this? Money, Charlotte replied bitterly. Connections. People who were willing to look the other way because my father's donations were too valuable to question. They drove through the night, knowing that by morning, their lives would never be the same. Charlotte had the evidence needed to expose the network, but she also knew that her father wouldn't let them reach the authorities without a fight. The final confrontation was coming, and Charlotte prayed they would both survive it. The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan buzzed with activity as Agent Sarah Rodriguez reviewed the evidence Charlotte and Maya had delivered at 6 a.m. that morning. The photographs from the basement files, combined with Maya's own investigation and the testimony of Detective Martinez, no relation to Maya's birth family, who had kept copies of the original case files, painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for 2 decades. This is the biggest child trafficking bust we've seen in years, Agent Rodriguez told them as she studied the documents. But we need to move fast. If Richard Whitmore suspects you found evidence, he'll destroy everything and disappear. Maya sat in the sterile federal building, still processing the scope of what they'd uncovered. How many children? She asked quietly. Based on your photographs, we're looking at 47 documented cases spanning from 2003 to this year. Agent Rodriguez replied grimly, but this may only be the tip of the iceberg. Charlotte felt the weight of every single case pressing down on her. Each file represented a stolen life, a family destroyed by grief, a child stripped of their identity and past. What happens now? We've obtained warrants for the Whitmore mansion, your father's offices, and the properties of 12 associates identified in the files. We're coordinating with local police departments in 6 states to locate and interview the children who were placed through this network. Agent Rodriguez paused, her expression softening slightly. Many of them may not remember their original lives, just like Maya. This is going to be a long and difficult process. The raids began at 8 a.m., Charlotte, and Maya watched from an FBI surveillance van as federal agents swarmed the mansion where Charlotte had grown up. Her parents were taken into custody without incident, her father maintaining his cold composure, even as handcuffs were placed on his wrists, her mother collapsing in tears that seemed more about social embarrassment than genuine remorse. Dr. Sarah Kellerman was arrested at a private clinic in New Jersey, where agents found additional evidence of the memory erasure procedures and a list of clients who had requested her services. The network was larger than they'd initially suspected, involving not just wealthy adoptive parents, but also a sophisticated medical operation that had perfected the art of stealing children's identities. Over the following weeks, the story dominated headlines across the country. Pharmaceutical heiress exposes father's child trafficking ring, read the New York Times. Missing children found alive after decades, proclaimed the Washington Post. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with philanthropy and medical innovation, became associated with one of the most shocking criminal cases in recent memory. Charlotte moved out of the mansion immediately, finding a small apartment in Brooklyn not far from Maya's place. The FBI had frozen most of the family assets as part of their investigation, but Charlotte discovered she didn't miss the luxury. For the first time in her life, she was living authentically. The hardest part was watching Maya reconnect with her birth father, Miguel Martinez. The reunion took place at the FBI office, 20 years after he'd last seen his 4-year-old daughter. Miguel, now graying and weathered by 2 decades of searching, broke down when he saw Maya walking toward him. "Sofia," he whispered, using her birth name. "Mi niña." I never stopped looking. Maya, who had decided to reclaim her birth name while keeping Chen as her middle name to honor her adoptive parents, couldn't remember him. But the love in his eyes was unmistakable. They began the slow process of rebuilding a relationship that had been stolen from them both. "I wish I could remember you," Sofia told him during one of their weekly visits. "I wish I could remember Mom. Your mother, she would be so proud of you," Miguel replied, showing her photos from their old life together. "You were brave then, and you're brave now. That hasn't changed." The trial began 8 months later. Richard Whitmore, Dr. Kellerman, and 15 other defendants faced charges ranging from kidnapping and human trafficking to money laundering and racketeering. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, built on the evidence Charlotte had photographed and corroborated by dozens of witnesses, including former associates who agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Charlotte testified against her father, a moment that required every ounce of courage she possessed. Standing in the witness box, facing the man who had raised her while simultaneously destroying dozens of families, she spoke clearly and definitively about what she had found in the basement. "He taught me that family loyalty was the most important value," Charlotte said during her testimony. "But I've learned that loyalty to justice and truth matters more than loyalty to blood." Richard Whitmore watched his daughter with cold indifference, never showing a flicker of remorse or recognition of the pain he had caused. When he finally took the stand in his own defense, his testimony was calculated and manipulative, attempting to portray himself as a legitimate businessman who had been deceived by associates. But the evidence was irrefutable. Dr. Kellerman, facing the possibility of life in prison, had agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. Her testimony revealed the horrifying details of the memory erasure procedures and identified additional victims who had never been reported missing because their families were too afraid or marginalized to go to police. Sofia also testified, her composed demeanor masking the emotional turmoil of confronting the man who had stolen her childhood. She spoke about the years of searching for her identity, the nightmares that never quite made sense, and the profound impact of discovering that her entire life had been built on a lie. "I lost more than just my memories," she told the jury. "I lost my language, my culture, my family's love during the most important years of my childhood. No amount of money or privilege can compensate for that theft." The trial lasted 3 months. When the verdicts were read, Richard Whitmore was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dr. Kellerman received 30 years. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 10 to 25 years, depending on their level of involvement. But the legal victory was only part of the healing process. Sofia and the other recovered victims began the difficult work of rebuilding their lives and connections with their birth families. Some, like Sofia, were able to reconnect successfully. Others found that too much time had passed, that they were strangers to the families they'd been stolen. From Charlotte used her business training and the remaining unfrozen family assets to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting trafficked children and their families. The organization, which she named Reclaimed Lives, provided therapy, legal assistance, and financial support to victims of trafficking operations. "I can't undo what my family did," Charlotte said during the foundation's first fundraising gala, held in the same ballroom where she and Sophia had first met. "But I can spend the rest of my life trying to repair the damage." The relationship between Charlotte and Sophia had deepened throughout the investigation and trial. What had begun as an attraction complicated by deception had evolved into something much stronger, a bond forged through shared trauma, courage, and the determination to seek justice regardless of personal cost. 2 years after the trial ended, they were married in a simple ceremony in Brooklyn, surrounded by Sophia's reclaimed family and Charlotte's new chosen family of friends, who had supported them through the darkest period of their lives. Miguel Martinez walked Sophia down the aisle, tears in his eyes as he gave his daughter to the woman who had helped bring her home. Sophia had enrolled in college to study social work, wanting to help other victims of trafficking and abuse. Charlotte had indeed become an elementary school teacher, finding joy in working with children who reminded her daily of the importance of protecting innocence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't approached you that night?" Sophia asked one evening as they sat in their modest apartment, planning their next steps for the foundation. "I think about it sometimes," Charlotte replied. "But then I remember that you were brave enough to seek the truth, and I was ready to face it. Maybe that was always meant to happen. Do you miss it? The money, the status, the easy life?" Charlotte looked around their small apartment, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in photos of the families they'd helped reunite through their foundation work. "This is the first life I've lived that's actually mine. I wouldn't trade it for anything." The final revelation came a year later, when Dr. Kellerman, hoping to reduce her sentence through continued cooperation, provided information about a sister operation that had been running in California. The investigation led to the rescue of 12 children and the arrest of another network of traffickers. Among the recovered children was a 6-year-old girl named Emma, who had been taken from her grandmother's care in Los Angeles 8 months earlier. Her reunion with her family was broadcast live, and Charlotte found herself crying as she watched a grandmother hold her granddaughter for the first time in nearly a year. "That could have been us," Sophia said, taking Charlotte's hand as they watched the reunion. "If you hadn't been brave enough to look in that basement, if you hadn't been brave enough to seek answers in the first place," Charlotte corrected. The work continued. Their foundation expanded to serve victims across the country, providing not just immediate support, but long-term assistance with education, therapy, and legal advocacy. They worked with law enforcement agencies to identify and dismantle other trafficking networks, using their experience and resources to prevent other children from experiencing what Sophia had endured. On the 3rd anniversary of Richard Whitmore's conviction, Charlotte and Sophia visited Rosa Martinez's grave in the Bronx. They brought flowers and a photo from their wedding, wanting to share their happiness with the woman who had died still searching for her daughter. "I think she would have liked you," Miguel told Charlotte as they stood by the headstone. "She always said that love could overcome anything, even the worst evil." As they drove home through the city where both their lives had been forever changed, Charlotte reflected on how completely their world had transformed. She had lost a family built on lies and gained one founded on truth. She had given up unearned privilege and found purpose in service to others. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, noticing Charlotte's contemplative mood. "I'm thinking about that night at the gala," Charlotte replied. "How you served champagne to people who had no idea they were looking at one of the strongest, bravest people they'd ever meet. I was terrified that night. Terrified you wouldn't believe me. Terrified of what we might find. But you did it anyway. That's what courage really is." Their story had become a symbol of hope for other trafficking victims and their families. They regularly spoke at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement, sharing their experience and advocating for better resources for survivors. But beyond the public work, their private life had become something neither had imagined possible when they first met. They had created a family together, not just the two of them, but an extended network of recovered victims, supportive friends, and dedicated advocates who had become their chosen family. As they pulled into their driveway, Charlotte looked at the woman beside her, the waitress who had served champagne at a gala, the missing child who had found the courage to seek truth, the survivor who had transformed tragedy into purpose. "I love you, Sophia Martinez Chen Whitmore," she said, using the hyphenated name Sophia had chosen to honor all the parts of her identity. "I love you too," Sophia replied, "and I love the life we've built together." Inside their apartment, the walls were covered with photos that told the story of dozens of reunited families, children who had been found and returned to their loved ones, and survivors who had rebuilt their lives with dignity and purpose. It was a different kind of wealth than Charlotte had grown up with. One measured not in dollars or status, but in lives saved, families reunited, and justice served. It was a legacy she could be proud of, built on truth rather than lies, love rather than manipulation. The heiress had indeed fallen in love with the waitress, but more importantly, they had both found themselves in the process of seeking justice for the most vulnerable. Their love story had become a story of redemption, courage, and the power of truth to transform even the darkest secrets into light.